Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. I came across a really interesting YouTube channel called Breakthrough News. They produced a really nice video. Let me go ahead and read the title of it for you. This I can read because it's in large print. Even if they invade Rafah, Israel still can't win the larger war. It is a relatively long video, so allow yourself some time to watch it, but it is excellent. It is an interview. I am surprised. I've never heard of the channel before, but it's a very good channel, and I strongly recommend that you subscribe to it too. Of course, that's up to you, not up to me, but I recommend it. Please also watch that video, that particular video, which is really good. And again, I will place a link to the video in the description box directly below the podcast. The title of the video, however, basically tells it all. Even if they are winning, Israel still can't win the larger war. And that is true. And what I wonder is, why have have the leaders of Israel, like Benjamin Netanyahu, not recognized that? Now, they are trying to, I suppose, get Gaza for themselves to expand the territory of Israel. I can understand intellectually why they want it. The population of Israel is expanding. The settlements, which they are putting in the Palestinian territories, um, are not enough. They really need more land for the number of people that are arriving in the country of Israel. Israel is a very small country. It is about the size of the state of New Jersey in the US. And if you've ever been to New Jersey, you know it is pretty small. It is somewhat long, starts in on the top just south of Rockland County, which is a suburb of New York City, and then ends at the Delaware Water Gap, right before you cross over into Delaware. And it is narrow. So it's a very small state. There really isn't much to New Jersey. Where I'm from, New York is a large state, very large state with mountains, and it's much more than New York City. In fact, a lot of people who live outside of New York City, in what people from New York City commonly call upstate, do not like New York City, and they wish New York City would go away. Well, that probably would not be a good idea for upstate. Why? Because New York City provides the bulk of the money, which makes New York State a relatively wealthy state. Without New York City, New York State would not be that wealthy. So they really need New York State. But I can understand, even as a person born and raised in New York City, why people in upstate, which is nothing like New York City, would feel that way. I mean, upstate New York is basically like the Midwest, or maybe when you get into the eastern portion, a bit like New England. It is nothing at all like New York City. So, yeah, I understand why they feel that way, even though I don't think it is very practical. But Israel, going back to the subject, a very small country, and they really need land if they expect um, more Jews to move into the country. And the policy of Israel is that Jews can move into Israel. So theoretically, I guess, since my parents were Jews, I would be allowed to move into Israel. As far as I know, the requirement is that one's mother needs to be Jewish. I know at one time there was a consideration given to what would happen if your father was Jewish, but not your mother. I don't know if that went anywhere because I really don't focus that much on Israel. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. Maybe someone can tell me in the comments section below this podcast. But I honestly don't know what would happen if your father was Jewish, but your mother was not. Would you still be permitted to move into Israel? But I know that I would, even though I have left the religion. I think when I was 14, I think. Again, I'm not positive about that. In fact, I'm not positive about almost anything connected to Israel because I simply don't keep up with it that much and have not kept up with it until this new incursion, this new terrorist act on Gaza started. Okay, so the question or the statement made as the title of that podcast is, in my view, extremely important. And even though the Gazans are suffering tremendously and have been basically cornered into that small area of Rafah, Hamas is still very much alive. Whatever Israel does, they cannot kill Hamas. I was listening to an interview that was given by Mehdi Hassan, who used to work for MSNBC, and prior to that, used to work for Al Jazeera English. He is now in the process of beginning his own media venture, and I wish him good luck in that. Mehdi, as far as I know, is not a communist, but at least he takes the side of the Palestinians. Now, he was careful about that when he worked with MSNBC, but now he's more open about it. But by the same token, what he says is that the original Hamas incursion into Israel was a terrorist act, and the current incursion by Israel into Gaza is also a terrorist attack. Well, I would agree with him on point 2, but not on point 1. If you are a prisoner, if you are not a criminal, but you are being confined to a place, and some people who live in your area, who basically live in your prison, by your, I mean Israel's, because Israel controls Gaza. It controls all the food, all the water, all the electricity that Gaza receives. Then why would an attack on Israel, even though it did kill civilians, be regarded as a terrorist attack? Now, I guess speaking technically, it would be. If you were being fair, you would have to say, yes, what Hamas did fits the definition of terrorism. But I don't care about that. I care about the fact that the Gazans are being held prisoner and that Hamas is the defender of the Gazans. To me, that is the only thing that matters to me. That's all I care about. Definitions to me are irrelevant. Okay, we can define it as terrorism. So what? So what? Does that mean Hamas should not have done it? What alternative did they have? Now, you can argue, well, they should not have killed civilians. Well, how would they have been able to make that distinction? If you are going into a place, if you are crossing over a very well protected border, and trying to let yourself be heard, then how do you make a distinction between military and civilians? I have no idea. So I can see what Israel is doing right now in Gaza as being a terrorist attack. Because to Israel, as I've said before, Israel and Hamas are the same. Whenever the Israeli leadership and other people in Israel say Hamas, they mean Israel. So the Israelis know precisely what it is that they are doing in Gaza. They know that when they bomb schools, when they bomb hospitals, when they bomb shopping centers, when they bomb streets, they know that they are killing civilians. So in the case of Israel, it is an intentional act of terrorism. So even though you could call what Hamas did, from a technical standpoint, terrorism, that is as far as I would want to go, is to say, yes, it meets the technicality. To be honest, I wish Mehdi Hassan should have said that. I wish he would have said that. But I'm not Mehdi. As far as I know, Mehdi is not a communist. He is on the left. I don't know how he would define himself. I've never heard him define himself. Maybe he has somewhere, but if so, I have not heard it or I have not read it, so I don't know what his definition is of his own political position. But I'm pretty sure he would not define himself as a communist. So I'm not going to defend Mehdi's view. I don't agree with him. I don't agree that the Hamas assault on Israel was truly a terrorist attack, even though it meets the dictionary definition of terrorism. So what? So what if it meets that definition? If you have people who are being held captive, let's say people who are being held prisoner in a basement. I remember this one case. It was several years ago, and I don't even remember where it was. There was a man who had a bunch of women. Originally, they were young girls, and he basically kept them in his basement. Now, he agreed to plead guilty in return for a life sentence. Otherwise, the case would have gone to court and he could have been executed. That was his agreement. But when he was making the plea, he asked something he should not have asked, something he agreed not to do. Namely, he wanted to maintain contact with his former hostages. He did. He said that to the judge. The judge, the prosecutor, got very angry at him, and for good reason. Well, pretty soon, when the guy got sent to prison, he committed suicide. Now, the circumstances of that suicide were never exactly clear, although it was a suicide, at least as far as what I read. Whether the guards simply looked the other way, which occasionally happens, or whether they did not look the other way, and whether they actually were unaware of the thing that happened, I don't know. I guess it could be either one. Either they were ignorant of it, or they knew he would do it, and they looked the other way. I would say that either would be possible. Now, I have no sympathy for that guy, but it is the job of the guards to watch over the inmates. That's their job. Part of what the guards are supposed to do is to protect the inmates. Often, however, guards don't do that. And when they don't, sometimes there will be prison riots, and sometimes people will take their own lives, especially when they are new inmates. the first 24 to 48 hours of a person's time in prison is when that individual is most susceptible to committing suicide. So, whatever the reason, the guards did not do their job. It was their responsibility to look after this person, to watch this person closely. However heinous his crime, his punishment was not execution. He pled guilty to avoid it. And yet he committed suicide, which is in effect execution, even if self-execution. So the guards really were irresponsible, in my view. I certainly had no sympathy for the guy. I mean, how could anybody have sympathy for a man who held these women captive? Truly heinous. One of them managed to escape, and I have no idea how she did it. And she ran across the street and told a neighbor where she was. At first, the neighbor didn't believe her, but eventually he did. And then the police were called in, and then they found these then women who were being held in the basement of this guy's home. And of course, he was arrested. Okay, so that is the situation that I would think is most comparable to where Gaza exists in relationship to Israel. They are like those inmates, those, well, those prisoners, those captives that were being held in that guy's home. And they escaped. Now, they did not kill anybody at all, but if, say, in running out, say they accidentally killed somebody, because how were they to know who anybody else was outside? Should they be held liable for that act? I would say no. Now, I realize that some people might disagree with me, but if you don't know where you are, if you have been held in a basement for years, how are you supposed to know who was a good person and who was a bad person? There was no way they could know that. That, I think, is very similar to the situation of Hamas. They came out of Gaza and they simply killed people because that was a way of them letting themselves be heard. Now, again, could that be called terrorism? Yes, it could, but not by me. Not by me. I would not call that terrorism. I would call that something like what happened with those young women who escaped from their captive's home where they were being held in the basement. So, okay. That said, where can we go from there? The present situation that is occurring right now in Gaza is really, to me, as somebody who has never been to that part of the world, has never been to West Asia, commonly called the Middle East. I have never been there. So I don't know what life is like in West Asia. No familiarity with it at all, other than what I have read, heard, or seen. That's all I know. My knowledge of that part of the world is very, very limited. But my empathy for all the Palestinians, not only the Gazans, but all the Palestinians, is immense. And I would not blame any of them if they killed an Israeli, because in effect, it is not just the government or the military, the IDF, whatever they are, police, military of Israel, that is keeping Palestinians captive. It is the whole country. I mean, when you have 80% of the people who live in Israel supporting a terrorist act, an act of state terrorism by Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, to me, by definition, that makes them guilty. Now, you could say, well, yeah, but what about that 20%? Again, yeah, sure. Maybe you could say that 20% should not be considered guilty. Right, I would agree with that. But again, how would anyone know that? And that, again, is why I don't consider that to be an act of terrorism. Hamas, as the representative of the Palestinian people, was doing something, was doing its job, really. They were doing what they were supposed to do. They were representing the interests of the Palestinians against a terrorist regime, namely the Zionist entity of Israel. The same kinds of thing that could have happened if these women had arms, which they didn't, and had escaped this man's basement and run across the street and killed people in the process. So again, to me, what's happening right now in Gaza is completely unforgivable. Israel should never be forgiven. So, going back to my initial point, why is Israel not winning? Why is Hamas, aka Gaza, winning? Well, it's because public opinion has shifted decidedly around the world against Israel. The world does not like Israel very much in the world. Most Americans do not like Israel, despite the fact that the president of our despicable nation calls himself a Zionist and has said he is on multiple occasions. Well, good for you, Uncle Joe. Call yourself a Zionist. Keep on sending a terrorist regime money and military supplies, and let's see how the US is perceived by the rest of the world. In fact, we know that already. We are not perceived very positively. And I think the longer that Biden commits his support to Israel, the lower the opinion, the public opinion of Israel will fall. And I see no prospect for that changing. So, no matter what happens with Israel, even if Israel kills many, many more Gazans, they can't kill the spirit of the Palestinians. They can't kill the spirit of Hamas. They can't really kill Hamas. They can kill a lot of people, and they have, and they've destroyed all or most of Gaza. There basically is no place to live there anymore, or almost no place to live there anymore, I guess, except in Rafah and maybe in some isolated other parts of Gaza. But Israel can't win. And it just surprises me that Benjamin Netanyahu, who is not a stupid man, he's an evil man, but he's not stupid. Not stupid at all. I would even say he's brilliant. I have listened to him talk. He is a very educated and well-spoken individual. He knows better, or he should know better. But apparently, for some reason, he does not. Apparently, he thinks that somehow he will win. And somehow he will conquer Gaza. And Gaza will simply become a part of Israel. Well, King Bibi, if you're watching me, and I'm sure you're not, I can tell you, no, you will not win. Like Humpty Dumpty, you will fall and break into pieces. You are not going to win this war. You may be winning now. It may look like you're winning, but in the long run, you will lose, as well you should. And I hope that loss occurs sooner rather than later, because the longer that this horrendous terrorist campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza goes on, the more innocent lives will be lost. And that is why I literally cannot understand why the vast majority of Israelis support this terrorist incursion. Now, if Israel had a controlled news system, meaning there were no other sources of news available except pro-government media, well, then maybe you could understand why most Israelis would support the war or the terrorist campaign. But that is not the case. Israelis have access to the same media sources that people do in North America and in Europe. So there is literally no excuse. There's no excuse whatsoever for the Zionist entity to be continuing its act of state terrorism against the Gazans. And yet, that act of state terrorism continues, at least for now. Let's hope, let's pray that that act of state terrorism ends as quickly as possible. For now, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.